The large, extravagant wedding hall shimmered with golden light from the chandeliers hanging above. The soft hum of conversation filled the air, and the sound of soft shoes on marble floors echoed as guests adjusted their tuxedos and gowns. The bride stood at the altar, her veil flowing like a cloud, her smile radiant. At the front of the room, the billionaire, Elliot Granger, adjusted his cufflinks, looking every bit the successful businessman he was. The room fell silent as the officiant spoke. The atmosphere was perfect. Yet, as the vows were about to begin, a small voice rang out from the back. "Stop! Don't!" The voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a sudden burst of cold. Elliot froze, his hand still outstretched to accept the bride's. The guests turned in confusion. The room was stunned into silence. The voice came again, louder this time. "Don't drink it," she switched the glass. Elliot's head snapped toward the source of the voice. It was a young girl, no older than 7, standing by the entrance. Her small, trembling figure contrasted against the grandeur of the hall. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else in her expression, something urgent. The billionaire's eyes narrowed. He recognized the girl now. She had been a child from the neighborhood, someone he had seen once or twice, but certainly not someone who belonged in this world. The guests murmured in disbelief, unsure if it was a joke or if the girl was somehow mistaken. Elliot's fiancée, Isidora, smiled a tight smile and turned to address the child. "Honey, this is not the time. Please go back to where you came from." But the girl didn't move. Instead, she stepped forward, her small feet clicking on the marble floor as she approached the altar. Her eyes never left Elliot's, a steady, unwavering gaze. Her small hand trembled as she reached into her bag, pulling out a small, crumpled piece of paper. The room held its breath as she stepped closer to the altar, her voice ringing out again. "I saw her. I saw her put something in your drink." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. His fiancée stood there, frozen, her smile faltering, and the truth slowly began to sink in. For a moment, everything stood still. The guests waited, unsure of what to do. Elliot stood there, his chest tightening. His mind raced. This was impossible. He had known Isidora for years. She was the woman he was about to marry. But what if this child was telling the truth? The girl's face was pale, her voice trembling, but there was something undeniable about the way she spoke, something that felt like a warning. Elliot turned to Isidora, his expression unreadable. The world around him seemed to fade as he looked at her, trying to gauge her reaction. The silence stretched on. "Elliot, don't listen to her," Isidora finally said, her voice smooth, but her eyes betraying a flicker of something darker. The tension in the air was palpable. The room had gone from elegance to confusion in an instant. The child continued, "Please, don't drink it. You'll be sorry." Every eye in the room was now on the girl, and Elliot could feel the weight of their gazes. He looked back at the girl. Her voice was quiet, but it was filled with a conviction that he could not ignore. The silence in the room stretched longer than anyone could bear. Elliot Granger stood frozen, his hand still in midair, halfway to the glass. His gaze shifted from the little girl to Isidora, his fiancée. The elegant smile that had once graced her lips now seemed to waver, and for a brief moment, her eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place: fear, guilt, or perhaps something darker. The billionaire's mind raced. The little girl, no older than 7, was still standing there, her eyes wide with an unspoken urgency. And yet, despite her youth, there was an undeniable weight in her voice. The whispers from the guests grew louder. "What is this about?" someone murmured. "Is she part of the entertainment? Is this a joke?" But Elliot couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled in his chest. He slowly lowered his hand, turning to face Isidora. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. "Isidora," Elliot said, his voice low, his words measured. "What is she talking about?" Isidora took a deep breath, her composure slowly returning. "She's just a child, Elliot," she said, her voice smooth, calm, almost too calm. "Children sometimes get confused, especially when they're left alone in places they shouldn't be." Her words were meant to soothe, but something in the way she said them made Elliot feel uneasy. The girl stood motionless, her gaze never leaving Elliot's. She stepped forward once more, her small shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. "She put something in your drink," the girl repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw her. I saw everything. Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to believe it was nothing, just an overactive imagination or a misunderstanding. But the more he looked at the girl, the more something felt wrong. Why would she say something like that? Who was she? And what was her connection to this situation? He glanced at Isadora, her eyes now avoiding his, her smile fading as she nervously adjusted her gown. Elliot turned back to the girl. What are you talking about? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. She held it out to him, her hands trembling. Elliot hesitated before taking it from her. The paper was stained, worn from being handled too many times. He unfolded it, his heart racing as he read the words written in a shaky hand. This is the truth, the paper read. She's planning something. She's not who she says she is. Don't drink it. It's poison. The room seemed to tilt as Elliot's world shifted on its axis. Poison? His mind raced as he looked up from the paper to Isadora, whose face had drained of color. Her calm demeanor was replaced with a look of panic she couldn't hide anymore. Elliot, please, Isadora said, her voice cracking slightly. This is ridiculous. That child doesn't know what she's talking about. You have to trust me. But Elliot couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at him. Was this just a child's imagination, or was there more to the story than he realized? Why would she lie about something like this? Elliot asked, his voice cold now, more to himself than to Isadora. She's not lying, Elliot. She's mistaken, Isadora said quickly, but there was something in her voice now that made Elliot's blood run cold. Something in her eyes, something that told him she was scared. The little girl stood her ground, looking at Elliot with pleading eyes. You have to listen to me, she said. She's going to hurt you. The billionaire felt his heart race. Was he really hearing this right? Could it be true? The woman he was about to marry, the woman who had been by his side for so long, was she capable of something like this? His thoughts were a blur. Who are you? Elliot asked the girl, his voice softer now. What do you want from me? The girl swallowed hard, her small voice shaking. I don't want anything from you. I just want to stop her. I don't want anyone to get hurt. Elliot glanced at the guests in the room, their eyes wide with confusion and curiosity. He had to make a decision, and fast. He couldn't ignore this. But what was he supposed to do? He could feel Isadora's gaze on him, the tension between them palpable. She was his fiancée, the woman he was about to marry. But now, everything was in question. The room held its breath, waiting for him to act. The tension in the room was unbearable. The crumpled note in Elliot's hands felt heavier with every passing second. His mind raced as he glanced back and forth between Isadora and the girl, trying to make sense of what was happening. The guests, once immersed in their conversations, now stood in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. Elliot's heart was pounding in his chest, but he forced himself to focus. He had to know the truth. I'm going to need to see more than just a note, Elliot said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. If you're telling the truth, then show me. The little girl didn't hesitate. She took a deep breath, wiped a tear from her cheek, and nodded. Slowly, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, sleek device. It was a recording pen, the kind of technology that could easily slip under the radar. She held it out to Elliot, her small fingers trembling. This will show you what happened, she said quietly. Elliot looked down at the device, then back at Isadora. His fiancée stood motionless, her face pale. Isadora, Elliot began, his voice cold. Why don't you want me to see what's on this? Isadora opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her gaze darted around the room, and she looked as though she might faint. The silence that hung in the air was thick and oppressive. Everyone was waiting for something, anything. Elliot's eyes narrowed. He didn't know what to believe anymore. The woman he was about to marry had been a part of his life for years, but now, this strange feeling gnawed at him. The girl's warning, the note, and now this recording device, everything pointed to something far darker than he could have imagined. Slowly, he took the pen from her hand. The girl's eyes were filled with desperation, and yet, she remained calm. You'll see, she whispered. You'll know the truth once you listen. Elliot pressed the button on the device, and the faint sound of static filled the room. A click followed, And then a voice that Elliot recognized, came through clearly. "You know what we need to do. Get him out of the picture. He's a liability," the voice of a woman said. Elliot froze. The blood drained from his face. It was Isadora's voice. "He's starting to suspect," the woman continued. "You need to act fast before he figures it out. I'll make sure everything is set up. The drink is the perfect way to do it. We can finally be free." The recording cut off abruptly, but the damage was done. Elliot's hands were shaking as he stared at the device. He had heard enough. Isadora's betrayal was undeniable. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Why?" was all he could manage to say. Isadora stood there, her body trembling. "Elliot, please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "It's not what you think." But Elliot wasn't listening anymore. The truth had been laid bare in front of him, and there was no denying it. The little girl's warning, the recording, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Isadora had planned to poison him, to eliminate him from the picture, so she could take everything for herself. "I trusted you," Elliot said, his voice barely above a whisper. His heart felt heavy with the weight of the betrayal. "I thought you loved me." The room around him seemed to collapse. Guests exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to leave or stay, but Elliot barely noticed them. His entire world was crashing down around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Isadora reached for him, but he stepped back, the distance between them now insurmountable. "Don't touch me," he said, his voice firm. "You're not who I thought you were." The little girl, standing off to the side, watched the scene unfold. Her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and sadness, but there was also something else, something stronger, a sense of justice. She had done what she could. Now, it was up to Elliot to make the right choice. For a long moment, Elliot didn't say anything. He just stared at Isadora, his heart heavy with the weight of the revelation. The woman he had loved, trusted, and planned to marry had plotted his demise. He had nearly been a victim of her cold ambition, and he had come so close to walking into that trap. Slowly, he turned toward the little girl. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, her expression serious. "I only wanted to help," she replied quietly. Elliot's gaze softened as he knelt down to her level. "You saved my life," he said. "I'll make sure you're safe." The truth had been laid bare in front of him, and there was no denying it. The little girl's warning, the recording, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Isadora had planned to poison him, to eliminate him from the picture, so she could take everything for herself. "I trusted you," Elliot said, his voice barely above a whisper. His heart felt heavy with the weight of the betrayal. "I thought you loved me." The room around him seemed to collapse. Elliot Granger stood frozen, still holding the recording device that had exposed the truth. His mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just unfolded before him. Isadora, his fiancée, was standing there, her face pale, her eyes pleading, but there was no more room for excuses. She had been caught in the lie, and the truth was now undeniable. Elliot could feel his heart beating loudly in his chest, and his thoughts seemed to swirl faster than he could keep up. He turned to the guests, who were now whispering among themselves, casting uncertain glances at each other, unsure of how to react. But Elliot's attention was solely on Isadora. "Why?" was all he could ask again, his voice quiet but full of disbelief. She took a hesitant step toward him, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for him. "Elliot, please. It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "I can explain everything." He pulled away from her, his eyes narrowing. "Explain? How can you explain this? How do you explain trying to poison me, trying to get rid of me for your own gain?" Isadora flinched as if his words were a slap, and the pain was clear on her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The truth hung in the air like an insurmountable wall between them. "I loved you," Elliot continued, his voice breaking. "And this is how you repay me?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, but still, she could not find the words. "Please, Elliot. I was scared. I thought if I didn't act, I would lose everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought you would never understand." Elliot's eyes softened for a moment. But the hurt in his chest was far stronger than any sympathy he might still feel. He couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The person he had trusted most had been plotting behind his back, and now there was no way to undo the damage. His gaze shifted to the little girl, still standing off to the side, watching quietly. She had been the one to expose everything. The one who had given him the truth he never saw coming. Elliot felt a wave of gratitude mixed with guilt wash over him. He couldn't imagine how this must have affected her, to be involved in something so dark at such a young age. "You were right," he said, his voice thick with emotion, as he walked toward the girl. "You saved my life." The little girl looked up at him, her face serious but not without a trace of pride. "I had to," she said simply. "I couldn't let you get hurt." Elliot knelt down to her level, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered. "You were brave. You've given me a chance to fix this." The girl smiled faintly, nodding. "It was the right thing to do," she replied quietly. Elliot turned back to Isadora, who was standing motionless, her eyes downcast. He felt a pang of sadness for what could have been, but the reality of the situation was too clear to ignore. There would be no going back to the life they had planned. He had trusted her, and she had betrayed him in the worst way possible. The woman who had promised to love him had tried to take everything from him. "It's over," Elliot said softly, his voice firm. Isadora looked up at him, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Elliot, please, don't leave me like this," she pleaded. "I don't know what came over me. I never meant to hurt you. Please, just give me another chance." But Elliot shook his head, his resolve hardening. "I can't," he said quietly. "I don't know who you are anymore." There was a long pause as the weight of his words settled between them. He took one last look at Isadora, then turned and walked toward the exit, his mind heavy with the realization that his life would never be the same again. The little girl followed him, her small footsteps echoing on the marble floor as they left the grand hall together. The guests remained where they were, still in shock, unsure of how to react. But Elliot didn't care about them anymore. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, the city lights flickered ahead, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe again. The truth had been revealed, and now it was time to move on. The cold air hit Elliot as he stepped outside, his breath visible in the darkening evening. The grand ballroom was now a distant memory, the clinking glasses and murmurs of the guests replaced by the silence that surrounded him. The weight of the moment was heavy on his chest. He had left Isadora behind, but the pain of what had just happened was still raw, lingering in the back of his mind. The little girl, who had just saved him from a fate he couldn't even imagine, walked beside him. Her small steps were determined, her face set with a quiet resolve. Elliot glanced down at her, still in awe of how she had been able to expose the truth in such a critical moment. "You did the right thing," Elliot said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." The girl looked up at him, her brown eyes steady and calm. "You don't have to," she replied simply. "I don't know what came over me. I never meant to hurt you. Please, just give me another chance." But Elliot shook his head, his resolve hardening. "I can't," he said quietly. "I don't know who you are anymore." There was a long pause as the weight of his words settled between them. He took one last look at Isadora, then turned and walked toward the exit, his mind heavy with the realization that his life would never be the same again. As they walked down the steps of the mansion, Elliot could feel a deep sense of loss mixed with something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. He had spent so many years wrapped up in the world he had built, never questioning the people around him. But now, everything had changed. He was no longer a man bound by the expectations of others. He was a man who had learned the hard way what true trust meant. "Where do you go now?" Elliot asked the girl, the thought of her being out there alone in the cold tugging at his heart. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she just kept walking, her gaze fixed ahead. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice quiet. "Wherever I can, wherever I'm needed." Elliot felt a pang of guilt at her words. She was so young, and yet she had already seen more of the world than anyone should at her age. He couldn't leave her like this. "You don't have to be alone," he said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "I'll help you. We'll figure this out." The girl stopped walking and turned to face him. For the first time, she smiled a small, cautious smile that held more strength than he had ever seen. "Thank you," she said simply. "But I don't want your pity. I just want to make sure the right thing is done." Elliot nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I get it," he said quietly. "You're a brave one." They continued walking through the night, the city lights twinkling ahead of them. Elliot's mind raced, but this time, it was not with the worries of business or betrayal. It was with something far more important, his own redemption. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. The night was quiet as they walked, but for the first time in a long while, Elliot felt a sense of peace. The darkness of the past had been exposed, and now it was time to move forward, to find a new path. He looked down at the little girl, who walked beside him with quiet confidence. She may have been small in stature, but in that moment, she seemed far stronger than anyone he knew. He had learned something tonight. Sometimes, the most unexpected people are the ones who can change everything. As they turned a corner, Elliot glanced at her again. "Where do you want to go?" he asked, feeling like he had no right to make the decision for her. She thought for a moment, then shrugged. "I don't really have anywhere specific in mind," she said, "but I guess wherever there's a chance to make things right." Elliot smiled, the weight of the world not quite so heavy anymore. He had no answers, no clear direction, but for the first time, he felt like he could face whatever came next. And with this girl by his side, maybe he wasn't so alone after all. The cool night air wrapped around Elliot and the girl as they walked through the empty streets. The city, usually bustling with life, now seemed eerily quiet, almost as if it had fallen asleep in the wake of everything that had happened. Elliot felt the weight of the evening's events pressing down on him. His entire world had been turned upside down. The life he thought he knew, his fiancée, his friends, his future had all been shattered in a matter of hours. But despite the chaos, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of clarity. The truth had come to light, and now, it was up to him to move forward. The girl beside him, though young, had shown more bravery than anyone he knew. She had done what no one else had the courage to do. She had exposed the truth. He couldn't help but admire her for that. They continued walking, passing by dimly lit streetlights and darkened storefronts. Elliot had no particular destination in mind, but it didn't matter. He wasn't thinking about business deals or luxury cars or the empire he had spent years building. For the first time, he was thinking about something much simpler. What was right? "How did you know?" Elliot asked, breaking the silence between them. "How did you know what was going on?" The girl didn't answer right away. She kept walking, her hands stuffed deep into her coat pockets. Her breath was visible in the cold air, and she seemed unfazed by the chill. "I saw things," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the night. "I saw people doing things they shouldn't, and I couldn't just stand by and watch." Elliot nodded, trying to wrap his mind around it. He had always been surrounded by wealth and power, but in this moment, it all felt so distant, so unimportant. The girl had reminded him of something he had forgotten over the years. There was more to life than money and status. There was something far more important: honesty, justice, the simple act of doing what was right. "You're very brave," Elliot said after a pause. "I'm not sure I would have been able to do what you did." She looked up at him, her face serious but softening with a hint of a smile. "It wasn't bravery," she said. "It was just the right thing to do. Someone had to stop her." Elliot's heart sank as he thought about Isadora. How could he have been so blind? The woman he had trusted, the woman he was about to marry, had tried to destroy everything he had worked for, all for her own gain. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but he knew it was the truth. And now, he had to live with it. But the girl beside him, this small, seemingly ordinary child, had given him something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe it wasn't too late for him to change. Maybe he could still do something good, something meaningful. They walked in silence for a while longer, the only sound the rhythmic crunch of their footsteps on the sidewalk. Elliot wasn't sure where they were going, but it didn't matter. For the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. "What's your name?" he asked, glancing down at the girl as they turned a corner. She hesitated for a moment, then looked up at him. "Anna," she said simply. "Anna, huh? That's a beautiful name." Elliot smiled slightly, his eyes warm. I'm Elliot. Anna nodded, but she didn't say anything else. She was quiet, as if lost in her own thoughts. Elliot could tell that she wasn't just a typical child. She had an understanding of the world far beyond her years, and though she didn't say much, there was wisdom in her silence. They eventually found themselves standing outside a small, unassuming diner. The neon sign flickered above them, casting a soft glow over the street. Elliot looked at Anna. How about we get something to eat? He asked. I'm starving, and I'm guessing you might be too. Anna looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she nodded, her eyes softening. Sure, she said. They stepped inside the diner, the warmth of the place, a sharp contrast to the cold outside. The smells of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, and Elliot immediately felt more at ease. They sat in a booth by the window, and a waitress quickly approached, handing them menus. As Elliot scanned the menu, his mind drifted back to the events of the evening. Isadora, the betrayal, the truth being revealed. It was all still so fresh, so raw. But sitting here with Anna, in this small, quiet diner, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Maybe it was because, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. He looked over at Anna, who was staring out the window, her small hands wrapped around a cup of water. She had done something incredible tonight, and Elliot was starting to realize that she wasn't just a little girl. She was someone who had the power to change lives. And maybe, just maybe, she had already changed his. The next morning, Elliot woke up with a heavy heart. He had barely slept, the events of the previous night replaying over and over in his mind. He couldn't believe how quickly everything had unraveled. The woman he had loved, the one he had trusted with his future, had been plotting against him all along. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking about Anna, the little girl who had exposed the truth and saved him. She had shown him what real courage looked like. The betrayal he had faced felt like a bitter pill, but Anna had reminded him of the goodness still left in the world. As Elliot sat in his office later that morning, staring out the window at the bustling city below, he knew he had to make things right. He couldn't let Isadora get away with what she had done. He had to take action, not just for himself, but for the people who had trusted him over the years. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his lawyer. Meeting scheduled for this afternoon. We can begin the process. Elliot read the message and set his phone down. He had made up his mind. He would take legal action, not just to protect himself, but to ensure that Isadora could never harm anyone else. But as he thought about his next steps, a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Anna's. Are you okay? She asked quietly, standing at the door of his office. Elliot turned to see her standing there, her small figure framed in the doorway. He smiled, though it was a bittersweet smile. I'm fine, Anna, he said, his voice softer than he expected. Just thinking. Anna nodded, stepping into the room. Thinking about her? She asked, her voice gentle but direct. Elliot didn't answer right away. He looked at Anna, trying to understand her perspective. She had been the one to expose Isadora, and he had no idea what the girl had seen or experienced before all of this. But there was something about her calm demeanor that made him feel like she understood more than anyone else. I don't know, he said finally. I don't know what to think about any of it. Anna walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. It's not your fault, she said quietly. People make mistakes. Sometimes they do terrible things. But you don't have to let it define who you are. Elliot looked at her, surprised by the wisdom in her words. She was just a kid, but her understanding of the world seemed far beyond her years. How do you know all of this? He asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Anna looked up at him, her eyes steady. I've seen people make mistakes before, she said. I've seen people hurt others, but that doesn't mean they can't change. You don't have to be like them. Elliot felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so much of his life trying to be perfect, trying to prove himself to others, but Anna had just reminded him of something simple, the power of redemption. He didn't have to let this betrayal define him. He could make things right. You're right, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I can't let this break me. I have to move forward. I have to do what's right. Anna nodded, a small smile forming on her face. That's the right choice, she said. You'll make it through this. Elliot smiled back at her, a weight lifting from his chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel completely alone. He had a long road ahead of him, and the path wouldn't be easy. But with Anna by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. As they stood there, looking out at the city, Elliot made a vow to himself. He would fix the damage Isadora had caused. He would take back control of his life and rebuild everything from the ground up. But most importantly, he would never forget the lesson Anna had taught him, that it's never too late to make things right. The days following the revelation felt like a blur. Elliot threw himself into the task at hand, focusing on the legal process that would remove Isadora from his life for good. He had hired the best lawyers, and every move they made was calculated to ensure she couldn't hurt him or anyone else again. But despite his busy schedule, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. It sat heavy on his chest, a weight he couldn't fully lift. He had been so sure of her, so convinced that their relationship was built on trust. Now, everything seemed tainted by her lies. He often found himself staring out of his office window, watching the world move on without him, his thoughts drifting back to Anna. She had given him the strength to stand up for himself, to see the truth in the mess that his life had become. She was still by his side, a quiet, steady presence, offering him the perspective he so desperately needed. It had been days since the betrayal had been exposed, and yet, it felt as if the world around him was holding its breath. No one spoke of Isadora. She had vanished from the public eye, and the media had moved on to the next big scandal. But Elliot couldn't forget what had happened, and he couldn't stop thinking about the little girl who had been his beacon of light. He had offered to help her, to make sure she wasn't alone in this world, but Anna had refused. "I don't need anyone to take care of me," she had said firmly. "I can take care of myself." Her words had stayed with him, reminding him of the independence and strength that defined her. He respected that about her. It was a trait that he admired more than he could express. Yet, he still worried about her. She had helped him, but he didn't want her to be alone in the world. He wanted to protect her the way she had protected him, but he knew he couldn't push her. She was stronger than anyone he knew, and she didn't want or need his help. Still, it troubled him that she had no one to rely on. That night, Elliot sat in his living room, the lights dimmed, his mind racing with a million thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about Anna and where she had gone. He knew she had mentioned something about staying under a bridge, but the thought of her out there, alone in the cold, made his heart ache. He reached for his phone and dialed her number, hoping for some kind of response. The phone rang once, twice, and then clicked to voicemail. He left a message, though he wasn't sure if she would even listen. "Anna," he said softly, his voice low with concern. "I know you don't want anyone's help, but please, let me know you're okay. You don't have to be alone. I'm here for you, whenever you need me." He hung up and stared at the phone, his mind still racing. A few moments later, he heard a soft knock at the door. It startled him, and for a moment, he thought it might be his mind playing tricks on him. But when he opened the door, he found Anna standing there, her small frame barely visible in the dim hallway light. Her hair was tangled, and her clothes looked worn from the cold. But her eyes, those same steady eyes that had helped him see through the lies, were focused and calm. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice soft but clear, "but I need your help." Elliot's heart skipped a beat, and he stepped aside to let her in. "You're never a bother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He had been worried about her, and now she was here, in his home, where she belonged. "What's going on? How can I help?" Anna hesitated, her gaze shifting to the floor before meeting his eyes again. "I don't have anywhere to stay," she said, her voice small but strong. "I don't want to be a burden, but I don't know where else to go." Elliot's heart broke at the words, and without hesitation, he moved closer to her. "You're not a burden," he said, his voice firm and reassuring. "You don't have to worry about that. You'll stay here with me, as long as you need. You don't have to be alone anymore." Anna looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, though she still held that quiet strength. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot smiled softly, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. He knew that there would be challenges ahead. But in that moment, with Anna by his side, he felt like he had found something worth fighting for. He had been given a second chance, and now he had a responsibility to make it count not just for himself, but for the people who mattered most. As he guided Anna inside, he made a silent promise to himself. He would rebuild his life, protect the people he cared about, and never take anything for granted again. The following days felt like a whirlwind. Elliot had set things in motion. He had moved swiftly to ensure that Isadora would face the consequences of her actions. His lawyers had already begun gathering evidence, and soon, the legal battle would unfold in full force. But amidst all of this, there was still something that weighed heavily on his heart. He couldn't stop thinking about Anna. She had become more than just the girl who had saved him from his own blindness. She was now a part of his life in a way that he hadn't expected. Every time he looked at her, he saw strength, resilience, and something he couldn't quite explain. She had walked into his life like a quiet storm, shaking everything in its path, but with a purpose. Anna had been staying at his place for the past few days, and despite the awkwardness of the situation, she never once made him feel like a burden. It was the opposite, really. She was like a quiet presence that grounded him, a reminder that there was more to life than power, status, and wealth. But it wasn't just about Anna. It was about the changes he had been forced to make. Elliot knew he couldn't go back to the life he had before, even if he tried. His eyes had been opened, and now he had to see things through a different lens. As the days went on, Anna grew more comfortable, though she still held back in many ways. There were moments when she would pull back into herself, a quiet shadow that was hard to read. Elliot knew she had her own struggles, her own past that had shaped her into the person she was. He had been given a glimpse of it, but it was clear that she wasn't ready to share everything. But even in her silence, she spoke volumes. Her actions were enough. She was loyal, kind, and fiercely independent, but there was a vulnerability to her that she rarely showed. Elliot had seen it once when she had stood in front of him, unsure of where to go. He had promised her she wouldn't have to be alone, but part of him felt like he was the one being saved. That night, as they sat together in the living room, a soft silence between them, Elliot glanced over at her. She was sitting by the window, her gaze far away, her fingers gently tracing the edge of a book she had picked up from the coffee table. "Anna," Elliot said softly, breaking the quiet. She looked up at him, and he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked, his voice almost tentative. She tilted her head, her eyes thoughtful. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. "I mean, after everything that's happened," Elliot said, his words careful. "Do you have a plan? A place you want to go?" There was a pause, a moment of hesitation. Anna closed the book and set it aside. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I don't really plan things," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "I just take things as they come. I never really had the luxury of planning." Elliot's heart tightened. He could see the weight of those words in her eyes. He could feel the gravity of her past, the things she had been through that had made her this way. She had lived a life without the comfort of stability, without the privilege of knowing that things would be okay. But despite that, she had managed to remain kind, thoughtful, and incredibly strong. "You don't have to live like that anymore," Elliot said softly. "You don't have to take things day by day anymore. You've got a place here with me, if you want it." The words hung in the air for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. Anna didn't answer right away, but after a few seconds, she nodded. "I know," she said quietly, "but I'm not sure how to live any other way. I don't know what to do with that." Elliot leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "We'll figure it out together," he said firmly. "I know I can't change everything in one day, but I can give you a place to stay. I can give you a future. You don't have to worry about being alone anymore." Anna was silent for a long time, and Elliot didn't push her. He knew it wasn't easy for her to trust, to accept help, but he could see the walls she had built around herself slowly starting to crack. And for the first time in a long time, Elliot felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Maybe, together, they could build something worth fighting for. They sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of their unspoken words filling the space between them. Elliot knew there was much more to this story, much more to uncover about Anna's past. But for now, he was content to sit beside her, to simply be there. They didn't need to talk about everything just yet. There was time for that. What mattered now was that they were no longer alone. They had each other. The next few days were filled with a sense of unease and anticipation. Elliot had made his decision. He was going to take action, but it wasn't going to be easy. He couldn't just brush aside the betrayal, the trust that had been broken, but he knew he had to do what was right, not only for himself but for the future he wanted to build. Anna had given him the clarity he so desperately needed, a reminder that life wasn't just about business deals and high-rise buildings. There was more to it: honesty, trust, and the people who mattered. As he sat in his office one afternoon, reviewing paperwork for the ongoing legal battle with Isadora, his mind drifted to Anna. She had been quieter lately, more introspective. He knew she was processing everything that had happened, just like he was. But he also knew that she hadn't fully opened up about her past. He didn't push her. He understood that some things needed time to heal, but there were moments when he would catch her staring out the window, as if lost in thought, and he wondered what she was thinking. He wanted to help, to be there for her, but he also knew that she had her own way of dealing with things. She was strong, stronger than most people he knew, and yet, there were cracks in her armor. That evening, after dinner, Anna came to him. It was late, and Elliot had just finished going over a few final details with his lawyer when she knocked softly on his door. "Can I talk to you?" she asked quietly, standing in the doorway. Elliot looked up, surprised but glad to see her. He motioned for her to come in. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, her hands clasped in front of her. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "About everything. About you." Elliot raised an eyebrow, not sure what she meant. He set his papers aside, giving her his full attention. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "I don't know how to say this," she said, her eyes meeting his. "But I'm grateful for what you've done for me. I don't think I ever had anyone who really looked out for me before." Elliot felt a wave of warmth at her words. It wasn't often that Anna spoke so openly about her feelings, and hearing her say this meant more than he could put into words. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I'm just doing what anyone would do. You're not alone, Anna." She nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes that wouldn't go away. "I never really had anyone to depend on," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And it's hard for me to accept help. I've always had to do things on my own." Elliot leaned forward in his chair, his eyes softening. "I understand, but you don't have to do everything on your own anymore. You have me now, and you don't need to carry everything by yourself." Anna remained silent for a moment, her eyes downcast as she processed his words. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling just a little. "I'm scared," she admitted, looking up at him. "I'm scared of what happens next, of trusting people, of getting hurt again." Elliot's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. He knew it wasn't easy for her to admit her fears, especially after everything she had been through. "I won't hurt you, Anna," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here, and I'll always have your back." She seemed to take comfort in his words, but the uncertainty remained in her eyes. I don't know how to let go of the past," she said softly. "How to move on from everything that's happened." Elliot stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's not easy, and it takes time. But you're not alone in this. You've got me, and together, we can figure it out." Anna looked up at him, her expression still uncertain, but there was a flicker of something hope, maybe in her eyes. "I want to believe that," she said quietly. "I really do." Elliot gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to do it all at once. We'll take it one step at a time, but no matter what, we'll face it together." They stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the room, the weight of their unspoken words hanging in the air. And for the first time in a long while, Elliot felt like things could get better. Maybe it wasn't going to be easy, but with Anna by his side, he felt like they could face anything, and that was enough. In that moment, Elliot made a promise to himself. He would not only rebuild his life, but he would protect Anna, help her find the peace she so deserved, and make sure she never had to face the world alone again. The weeks following their conversation felt like a turning point for both Elliot and Anna. Elliot had been hard at work, balancing the ongoing legal battles with the need to reevaluate his life. Every step he took, he thought about the future. He was now trying to build a future where honesty, trust, and genuine connections replaced the emptiness of his old life. But his thoughts often turned to Anna. She had shown him so much about resilience and strength, even when it seemed like the world had turned its back on her. Though she had been through so much, she still carried herself with a quiet dignity that Elliot couldn't help but admire. They spent more time together, the awkwardness that once existed between them slowly fading into something more comfortable, something real. Anna, though still wary of the world, had started to open up more to Elliot. She would talk about her past in bits and pieces, but always with hesitation. Elliot didn't push her. He knew trust wasn't something that could be rushed. What mattered most was that she had begun to trust him, and that, in itself, was a victory. One afternoon, Elliot was sitting in his office, catching up on work, when he received a message from his lawyer. The legal proceedings were moving forward faster than he had anticipated. Isadora's defenses were crumbling, and the case against her was getting stronger every day. Elliot felt a sense of justice rising within him. He had always believed in doing what was right, but now he felt like the universe was aligning to give him the closure he needed. He was about to reclaim control over his life, something he had almost lost. But despite this, there was still one lingering thought in his mind: Anna. She had been through so much already, and the last thing he wanted was for her to feel abandoned now that things were finally coming together for him. He wanted to make sure that she felt safe, loved, and valued. He wasn't just fighting for his own peace of mind. He was fighting for her as well. Later that day, after his work had ended, Elliot decided to take a break. He left the office and drove to a small park near the edge of the city. He had learned over the past few weeks that sometimes, a change of scenery was all it took to clear his mind. He sat on a bench, watching the evening sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Anna walking toward him, her hands in her pockets, her face lit by the fading sunlight. She had been quiet lately, more reserved than usual, and Elliot could tell that something was weighing on her. "Hey," he said softly, standing up to greet her. "I thought you might like some fresh air." Anna smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said, sitting down beside him. "I needed to get out of the house for a bit." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the world go by. Elliot could sense that she was holding something back, and for the first time, he decided to push a little further. "What's going on, Anna?" he asked gently. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" Anna hesitated, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've just been thinking a lot," she said finally. "About everything, about what happens next." Elliot's heart sank slightly. He had feared this moment when Anna would have to confront the reality of her past and figure out where she truly belonged. He didn't want her to feel lost, but he knew he couldn't give her all the answers. He could only be there for her, support her the best way he knew how. "I know things haven't been easy," he said softly, "but whatever happens next, you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll help you figure it out." Anna looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something: comfort, reassurance, perhaps. "I don't know if I can ever really let go of what's happened," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust again. I've been hurt too many times." Elliot felt his chest tighten. He understood that pain. He understood what it was like to trust someone only to have that trust broken. But he also knew that healing, though slow, was possible. "You don't have to trust anyone else right now," he said gently. "You just have to trust that you're not alone in this. And when you're ready, we'll figure out the rest together." For the first time in days, Anna's eyes softened. She gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Elliot placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "We're in this together, and we'll get through it, step by step." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the park, Elliot felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would be challenging, but with Anna by his side, he felt ready to face it. Together, they would heal. Together, they would move forward. And together, They would find their place in a world that had once seemed so unforgiving. The weeks passed slowly, but Elliot felt himself changing, slowly finding a balance between the life he had known and the life he was now building. The legal battle with Isadora was drawing to a close, and it was clear that justice was on his side. But despite the victories, something inside him still felt unsettled. There were moments of reflection, moments when his mind wandered back to Anna and everything she had shown him. She had become more than just a friend, more than just someone who had helped him see the truth. She had become a part of his life, a constant reminder of what truly mattered. She had shown him what it meant to face the world with integrity, to stand up for what was right no matter the cost. But she was still carrying her own burdens, and Elliot knew that she had only shared the surface of her story with him. He could sense her hesitation, her reluctance to fully let go of the past. One night, as they sat together in the living room, a soft rain began to fall outside, the sound of it tapping against the windows providing a peaceful backdrop to their quiet evening. Elliot was reading through some documents when Anna sat beside him, a rare moment of calm in her usually guarded demeanor. She seemed distant, lost in thought, and Elliot put his papers aside, turning his full attention to her. "You okay?" he asked gently, his voice soft, understanding. Anna didn't immediately answer, but after a moment, she spoke, her voice low, barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about where I belong, about what I'm supposed to do next." Elliot listened carefully, his heart heavy with concern. He knew she had been carrying the weight of her past with her, but hearing her express it so openly made him realize just how much it had shaped her. She wasn't just a young girl who had survived. She was someone who had learned to protect herself, to stay strong, even when everything around her seemed to fall apart. "I don't really know what I'm doing," Anna continued, her eyes not meeting his. "I don't know where I fit in. I'm not like everyone else." Elliot reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. "You don't have to be like everyone else," he said quietly. "You've never had to. You're enough just the way you are." Anna finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "I want to believe that," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's hard. I've spent so long just trying to survive, just trying to get by. I don't know how to do anything else." Elliot's heart broke for her, but he also understood. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, standing in front of him, trying to figure out who she really was. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "You don't have to do it by yourself anymore. I'm here, and no matter what happens, I'll be here." The words seemed to settle in the air between them, a promise that was more than just words. It was a bond, one that was unbreakable. Anna's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to trust that someone would be there to catch her if she fell. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice steadier now, "but I think I'm ready to find out." Elliot smiled gently, feeling a warmth spread through him. "That's all any of us can do," he said. "Take things one step at a time." The two of them sat there for a while, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light over the room as the rain continued to fall outside. They didn't need to say anything more. They both understood that, for now, they had each other. Whatever the future brought, they would face it together. Elliot had come to realize that it wasn't just about rebuilding his life or winning a legal battle. It was about the people who made it worth living, people like Anna, who had taught him what it truly meant to care, to be there for someone without expecting anything in return. And with that thought, Elliot knew that he had everything he needed to move forward. They both did. Months had passed, and the world had started to feel like it was finally moving in the right direction again. Elliot had rebuilt his life from the ground up, making sure that Isadora's betrayal was nothing more than a chapter he could leave behind. The legal battles had ended, and he had come out on top, but that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered now was the peace he had found, the new life he was building with Anna. They had become more than just two people who had crossed paths by chance. They had become a family. Anna, who had once been lost and alone, had slowly found her place in the world, and Elliot was determined to help her find it for good. The house, once cold and empty, was now filled with laughter, warmth, and a sense of belonging. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Anna glanced over at Elliot, her eyes reflecting a newfound calmness. "I've been thinking," she said softly, breaking the silence. Elliot looked up from his book and smiled. About what? About my future, she replied, her voice steady. About what I want to do next. Elliot's heart swelled with pride. Anna had come so far, and it was clear that she was no longer the same person she had been when they first met. She was growing into someone strong, someone who knew her worth. What are you thinking? He asked, setting the book aside. I want to help people, she said, her voice filled with determination. I don't want anyone to feel as lost as I did. I want to be there for them, like you were there for me. Elliot's eyes softened. It wasn't just about helping others. It was about giving them the chance to feel seen, to feel valued. Anna had always known how to make people feel important, even when they didn't believe it themselves. She had a gift for seeing through the surface and finding the truth beneath. You'll make an amazing difference, Anna, Elliot said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm proud of you. Anna smiled, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. I don't know where to start, she admitted. I don't know how to turn this into something real. Elliot reached over and placed a reassuring hand on hers. We'll figure it out together, he said, one step at a time. The bond between them had become unbreakable. Together, they had faced their fears, their doubts, and their pasts, and they had come out stronger. Anna wasn't just someone Elliot had helped along the way. She had been his anchor, his guide, and his reminder that true strength came from embracing vulnerability. She had taught him to trust again, not just others, but himself. The future was uncertain, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had each other. In that moment, Elliot realized something that had been staring him in the face all along. About what? About my future, she replied, her voice steady. About what I want to do next. Elliot's heart swelled with pride. Anna had come so far, and it was clear that she was no longer the same person she had been when they first met. She was growing into someone strong, someone who knew her worth. What are you thinking? He asked, setting the book aside. I want to help people, she said, her voice filled with determination. I don't want anyone to feel as lost as I did. Whatever came next, he would face it with Anna by his side, ready to build the life they both deserved. Together, they had the strength to overcome anything, and together, they would make a difference in the world, one step at a time. Discover a heartwarming journey through the world of Black stories, where trust, redemption, and resilience shape the lives of those who choose to face their pasts and build brighter futures. Follow Elliot, a successful billionaire who finds his world upended by a betrayal that shakes him to the core. As he rebuilds his life, he encounters Anna, a young girl with a powerful story of survival and strength. In this touching narrative, the theme of Black stories comes alive as Anna teaches Elliot the true meaning of courage, vulnerability, and trust. Together, they embark on a journey of healing, where the past is no longer a weight but a lesson that shapes their path forward. These Black stories explore not just survival but the power of connection, understanding, and the shared human experience. As Elliot and Anna navigate their respective challenges, they discover that strength doesn't come from wealth or status, but from the relationships we build and the people who support us. Through their journey, they learn that it's never too late to change, to trust again, and to embrace the love and understanding that they both need. This tale of Black stories reminds us all that while the road may be tough, the most valuable things in life are the ones that can't be bought. Join Elliot and Anna as they find healing, redemption, and a future filled with hope, love, and purpose in a world that is constantly changing. Experience the depth of Black stories through their eyes, as they inspire us all to believe in the power of second chances and the importance of never being alone in our journey.